You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to Bookstorm Podcast, book lovers. We have a special treat for you today. We have a writing duo. It's only our third writing duo on Bookstorm Podcast. And like you, we have found that when you put together two talented, gifted authors and they write a story together, you're getting double the knowledge, double the expertise, double the heartfelt feeling. And that's what we have with us here today with Marcus Brotherton and Tosca Lee and The Long March Home. Welcome, both of you. Thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Now, before we get started, I like to tell our listeners just a little glimpse of your bio, because you have a lot of followers and people who love your writing, but maybe they don't know some of your accomplishments or a little bit of your personal life. And it's sort of fun for Kristen and I too. So Tosca Lee is the award-winning New York Times bestselling author and the recipient of 2 international book awards, the Killers Nashville Silver Falcon and ECPA Book of the Year in Fiction. She's also the winner of the Nebraska Book Award. She has so many accolades and so many endorsements. She's Goodreads Choice Award semifinalist for Best Mystery Thriller. She's appeared on IndieBound bestseller lists, Library Journal, best of lists. And I could go on, but we're dying to hear her talk about this beautiful story. She lives in Nebraska with her husband, 3 of 4 children still at home. You're doing something wonderful to keep them all there. And a 160-pound German Shepherd. I follow her on Facebook loyally. I just saw the coolest book cover. It was Books and Buzz. And for anyone who's not on Facebook, you got to check this cover out because that was spectacular. And I love following you. And welcome. Publishers Weekly says of Tosca, she has superior storytelling talent. And Kristen and I agree. Welcome. So happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Then we also have Marcus Brotherton. He is a New York Times bestselling author and co-author dedicated to, and I love this, writing books that inspire heroics, promote empathy, and encourage noble living. He has so many commendations and accolades and awards. Let me name a few. The Christopher Award for Literature that affirms the highest values of the human spirit. His books are New York Times bestsellers. They're national bestsellers. They've been optioned for film. They've received book lists, star reviews, Publishers Weekly, star reviews, Wall Street Journal, ECPA. He lives in the Pacific Northwest with his wife and 3 children. I also follow him on Facebook. And then there's another magazine cover we all have to check out, Top Shelf Magazine, where the both of them are featured on the cover, which is just fabulous too. You're doing all kinds of wonderful things. And I'm attributing a lot of it to this beautiful book that's just come out now. One more thing, put these 2 dynamic, extremely uber talented writers together. They come out with their newest novel, The Long March Home, which Kristen's going to tell us about. And this book has been a starred review for Publishers Weekly, starred review for Booklist, Library Journal starred review. They're calling it a tour de force, a literary triumph, a great read. And 2 of our Bookstorm podcast friends who've been on our show, Lisa Wingate and Susan Meissner, they say, I'm going to quote, packed with tension and utterly compelling. And yes, Lisa and Susan, Kristen and I agree. It is a must read. Welcome, Marcus.
Thanks so much.
Well, as Chris mentioned, we're here to talk about The Long March Home. And I like to give our listeners a summary of the background of the book without giving away too much. And of course, we would love it if at the end you wanted to add anything I forget. But this story follows four friends whose lives change when America becomes embroiled in World War II. We start out in 1930s Mobile, Alabama. We meet preacher's son, Jimmy Propfield, and he has an idyllic upbringing with his childhood sweetheart, Claire Crockett, and her younger brother, Billy. Hank Wright soon joins their circle, and they become inseparable as they grow up. Now, as the U.S. is gearing up to possibly enter World War II, one of them joins the military, and the other boys soon follow. The three are assigned to the 31st Infantry in Manila in the Philippines, which at first seems like paradise, but things turn terribly wrong after, of course, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and then the Philippines, which a lot of people don't necessarily realize, the Luzon island. This begins a battle for control of the Pacific Theater, and soon the U.S. and Philippine governments surrender the peninsula, and these soldiers are taken prisoner. They are marched for 6 days. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Bataan Death March. That's what it became. But this book is beautiful and heartfelt because it details their struggle to survive, the things they hold onto, the things that they hold dear. And I don't know how you did it, but it was a book that was both enlightening, it was inspiring, but oh my goodness, it will just make you feel. So thank you. Do you want to add anything as far as by way of background?
Oh, this was a 12-year novel in the making. So to hear these wonderful words is very heartwarming for us after over a decade of work between the two of us.
Wow.
This is actually my Monday morning. I'm on the West Coast, so I'm a couple of hours behind you guys, I guess. And it's a great way to sort of come start the week and just hear all this good stuff. So thank you very much, and I will pay you later.
You don't owe us a thing because we as readers are so grateful for storytellers like both of you. You take us places that we never thought we could go. You enable us to feel things that we should be feeling. And that leads into my first question. I said, thank you for this important story. It's clearly based on truth, and your years of research are very obvious to the reader. You know what you're talking about. What this is overlooked, this part of history, it's possibly unknown, too quickly forgotten, but something that should and must be remembered. As I said before we started, I cried at the end. How does any person endure the battlefield of war? We have Jimmy, Hank, and Billy. Each one possessed strength they never knew they had, maybe even weaknesses they never knew they had. As the researchers of historical truth and the creators of these three beloved characters, could you each expand on what you instilled in them that any of us would derive our strength from in our most desperate, horrific, painful moments? Is it God, family, love, hope, righting past wrongs? What made Jimmy, of all the characters, keep taking that seemingly impossible step forward?
Marcus?
In real life, I've been around a lot of strong people. And in fact, the book, the genesis for this book, I spent a number of years interviewing real World War II veterans. I still do, as a matter of fact. The last two veterans I spoke with were 101 and 103 years old. So we're sort of quickly losing this generation of incredible people. One of the veterans that I spoke with was Lieutenant Buck Compton, and was one of the original Band of Brothers. He was a paratrooper who fought in D-Day in Normandy and made it all the way through the war. And after his book came out, I helped him write his memoirs. And excuse me, he was still speaking around the country by then. He was 85 years old, and he needed a little bit of help navigating airports and whatnot. And so his daughter called me up, and we are good friends by then. And she said, can you just help my dad? Would you like to be his traveling partner? And immediately I jumped at the chance. And so Buck and I toured the country, went to various shows and whatnot. And he had a really clear memory. And so he'd often would be sitting in airport lounges, just talking about various things, and he'd be telling me crystal clear details of what had happened during the war. So one day we're in an airport, and he says to me, we're talking about Bastogne, where he had fought, and Bastogne was this winter hell in Belgium. The men were outgunned, outmanned, not enough food, not enough ammunition. And Buck, this guy that I'm sitting with, endured this. That's the kind of strength he had. And I remarked something casually like, wow, it must have been so difficult for you. And Buck said, yeah, it was hard. It was really hard. And then he stops and he says, but at least I wasn't in the Pacific. He says, man, those guys had it really rough. So that was my journey. That was where my journey began. And I was just like, how can you say that given where you have been? And that started me on this research journey into strength. And your specific question is what gives strength to people? Dig down deep. I think it's all those things you mentioned. With the brotherhood, the friendship, the camaraderie of we've got to get through this. We've got to get through this alive and giving everything we've got.
When we were researching the survivor accounts, many survivors would talk about the fact that those who made it through, not just the war and the surrender and the march, but in those nearly 4 years as POWs, the ones that survived often had friends. They had buddies looking out for them. And so it truly is a story about friendship and hope and all of those things too. It's about the memories and the people and the relationships that sustain us. But it's also a personal journey for the main character, Jimmy, who at the beginning he's a good boy. He's always been good. And he's never had to, his dad's a pastor. He's never had to really own his own faith. He's never had to own, a lot of this stuff. He's always been good. But throughout this journey, he has to, come to rely on the mercies and the gifts and the grace of others. And so it's a spiritual journey for him as well.
And what each of you said hit me so strong. Isn't it interesting in life, and as the reader, when we read this book, that when we in our own world think that we're enduring something very difficult or horrific, it sometimes helps us to gain strength to view someone else's world and see something so much apparently stronger or worse, as the elderly gentleman said to you, Marcus, and how you said, Tosca, about helping your friends. And I felt that as a reader, it just took you to a place that the average everyday person does not go. And yet in our everyday lives, we find so much to complain about and criticize. And sometimes I just feel books like these are important to take us somewhere where people are living life or death. And we actually crawled in their skin for a time being, thanks to you as writers, felt what they felt and kind of got back to the basic of what matters in life, what really matters when you get rid of all the rest of it. And through their look backs, through their interaction, these friends with each other, I don't know if you intended to do it or did it organically come out of the writing, but we felt those strengths in them.
Mm-hmm. We really wanted to offer this dual timeline in the storyline for a couple of reasons. The first is that the present timeline in the story is the war and everything heavy that goes with it. And so being able to step back every few chapters and go back to the 1930s before they enlisted in 1941, when they're growing up and they're boys and they're having this carefree existence as children and coming of age and having young romance and all those things. It offered a respite from the war, but it also showed how those bonds of friendship became bonds of brotherhood.
Yeah.
I'd say that everybody's pain is valid. Like we all go through difficult times, and I think we're not trying to, we're not trying to minimize anybody's pain in terms of our readership. At the same time, we do discuss the extreme conditions that these soldiers fought under. And one of the takeaways that we hope to promote is gratefulness. And I think, Chris, this is what you're talking about here, that when we read that real people actually did go through these things, it helps put our own problems in perspective. And perhaps my Mondays are not as bad as I think they are, and compared to what they went through.
Mhm. It's a beautiful story. Thank you.
Excellent. I want to talk a little bit about the Bataan Death March because it's very, very not well known in our history. I'm the daughter of a World War II buff. My dad taught history, and I did not know about this. So I'd like to just talk about this and some of the atrocities. Roughly 75,000 Allied soldiers were forced to walk like 65 miles over 6 days with no food or water. And they were beaten, they were deprived of medical attention, forced to endure hellish conditions. I think there's estimates I read that like 10,000 men may have perished just during that march alone, and half of them American soldiers, some of whom were 15 or 16, 17, maybe 15, but very, very young men. These are astounding numbers. And there were they were far from home. There were no reinforcements coming. There was a surrender at play. Why do you think we don't know more about this chapter as kind of a collective consciousness? Do you think it was considered a very dark or shameful time in our history as a nation because a surrender was involved?
I would guess that the surrender has a part to do with that. There were so many men who survived, that there were so many men among those who survived who, when they came home, never spoke about what happened. And the stories that get remembered are the stories that get told. And so without those survivors telling their stories, and fortunately, Marcus has been able to speak with survivors. We've also been able to study survivor accounts with very vivid detail, incredible detail. But I think there definitely was a part around the surrender that did not get spoken about for a really long time.
Yeah, it's not that well known in the Pacific Theater that after Imperial Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, attacked Pearl Harbor, there was a number of other countries that were attacked, and these other countries were guarded and defended by various other allied countries. A number of them fell quickly, but the Philippines, the guys in the Philippines fought back for 4.5 months. It was the longest holdout of anybody. Now, eventually they were outgunned and outmanned, and it was this massive surrender. But there's been a lot of good analysis by historians in recent years that really gives the guys in the Philippines a lot of credence for causing a good delay to happen. And while this delay was happening, America got up to speed. America was not necessarily prepared in any great way for World War II. But because of the actions of the defenders of Bataan, it enabled America after Pearl Harbor to kind of catch its breath and be able to regroup a little bit so they could come in the stronger force that eventually led to triumph.
Yeah. And I think too that may have saved many lives in terms of, weighing, do we fight until there's nobody left? Because there were no reinforcements coming. And I was thinking about the general who had to make those decisions. And I don't know, that was very heart-wrenching for me to think about.
General Jonathan Wainwright was the guy who gave the kind of the final surrender order from Corregidor, the little island off the coast. And again, he's kind of a controversial figure in history, and yet there's a lot of good analysis today saying actually he did the right thing. He saved lives. There were any number of civilians who were getting shellacked. There were nurses on Bataan and Corregidor, and General Wainwright's actions really did save lives. Is the consensus today?
Yeah. Thank you for shining a light on that.
And I just want to go back to something about the dual time period, because I caught myself as the reader doing something astounding. You accomplished something very unusual and I think very difficult as two writers. You made the reader smile and laugh and celebrate life in one chapter. Then the next chapter, I'm suffering, cursing, and crying. And I kind of thought, wow, that sort of is the real world. It's kind of how our lives are a lot of times. The juxtaposition of good versus evil was shockingly profound. Did your characters, and must we in the real world, believe that good far outweighs evil in order to persevere? And I wanted to bring this up. I love this in the prison camp. Tosca touched on this. They remembered their first love, their first kiss. They remembered something like the renovating of an old automobile. And I thought, what is it about those little good things in life? It doesn't have to be something major, but even for those simple, fleeting moments of joy, is that what carries us through sorrow?
I tend to think it is. It's the relationships, it's the things that make us smile. It's the projects that give us energy, whether it's renovating an automobile or whatever it is, cooking, whatever. I think that those are the things that help us balance and get through. And I am one of those people who tends to believe that people are generally good and looking for the good, and people generally want to help other people. I felt like it was really important that we had those moments of levity. I think back a lot on projects like this. I tend to think back to projects that have a lot of heaviness in them, but balanced heaviness and humor really well. And one of those that I think back to often is the movie Braveheart. And Braveheart is a heavy historical movie. And the end is rough, but there were moments that you can't help but laugh, and because of the dialogue, or because of the quirks of human nature, or because of whatever it was. But I distinctly remember, and I've watched that movie so many times, how well balanced the humor and the moments of humanity were with the incredible inhumanity.
Yeah, this is really a great question. I mean, because life for all of us does contain those moments and those seasons even of despair and darkness, and yet despair and darkness don't need to win. I mean, we can have access to and sort of live in the light, live in victory and strength and confidence. And truly, that's what this book shows. It is dark in places because it does reflect the accuracy of history. This was a dark moment for the world. And yet the darkness does not win. That is the big theme of this book.
Thank you for both of that. And, I thought as the reader, I thought, you can imprison someone's body and you can chain them up and put them in a room, but you can't control their thoughts. And apart from, let's say, severe brainwashing, but even for us in the real world, I thought, even where they were physically, they still had their minds and their memories, and like, even if it was a recipe or like the kiss, we can all take advantage of that, even here in this world today.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I want to go back to something that you both have either touched on or mentioned, and that is this idea of gratitude. There's a scene in your book, and I won't say who it is, but one of these young men comes back home, and he's not the same person, who left. He looks different. He's missing an eye. He has a limp. And at one point, he hears about a college football game that went on while he was gone, and he can't believe that normal life was going on while hell raged across the Pacific Theater. Is that the idea of sacrifice, do you think, where these soldiers sacrifice their well-being, their bodies, their lives, so that the rest of us may live in peace? And, can we fully appreciate that?
Yeah, absolutely. Do we fully appreciate it without having lived through it? I don't know. But that's absolutely the idea. And how surreal would it be to have given 4 years basically of your life in these terrible conditions, starving, in just horrible, inhumane conditions, and come back and see that life has in some ways gone on. So it's not just a sacrifice of your body. It's not just a sacrifice of your time. It's a sacrifice too of your dreams and your hopes and the things that you loved about your home life and your normal life that were given as well.
Or to literature, I would say does well. I mean, as a genre, it works. And for those of us who study books as much as anything, we have to ask why. Why does this time period continue to fascinate us as it does? And I believe it's for that reason that it does prompt gratitude when we begin to understand that people have given much for us today. People in history gave much so that we can live today in freedom. That prompts us to be grateful. It prompts us to live lives of purpose today. It prompts us to want to do something significant with our own lives, because our lives have been bought in blood, to use that term. So we better do something important with our lives today.
Yeah, very well put. I was thinking about this on Memorial Day. I was actually thinking about your book because there I am enjoying a picnic with my children. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because we have been kept free by the price that others have paid. And that's so well put, Marcus. Thank you. And Tosca.
And so before I ever even read the book, and I always look to see the dedication. And I love this one. For all who are finding their way home. Okay. Will you each expand? I have a feeling this is more than just military, our military.
We had a conversation, and you work on the book first, and then you come back and you think about things like the dedication and the author's note and these materials that kind of wrap around it. And Marcus and I talked at length, who should this be dedicated to? Is it dedicated, to those who were involved and to those who served? But then we thought, it's not just that. It's to all of us who are trying to find the way back home or the way to our purpose. And so that was the product of a actually very fun conversation between the two of us.
Yeah, we've received a fair bit of criticism already for this book, because a certain number of readers are saying this is really not a Christian book. I mean, it's a Christian publisher, but it's where is the sermon in this book? And there isn't sort of 3 points. It's not nicely wrapped up in a bow with a poem at the end. And yet our encouragement is to all readers is to look for the metaphor, to look for the symbolism, to look for the imagery, because it's all there. And there are big pieces of a redemptive message in people finding their way home, people being forgiven, people being washed clean by hands that are not their own, people receiving tremendous gifts that are unexpected and even undeserved. So look for the imagery. It's all there. It's for anyone who's looking for greater step in.
It absolutely is there in every kind of way. And Kristen and I are both very big believers that readers are smart. We don't want to be spoon-fed. We don't want you to spell out all the answers and all the themes and all the meaning. We need to discover these things on our own. Give us stories, show us people, let us crawl inside them, but don't preach to us, please. We're smart people. And that's what you gave us. You gave us a very intelligent, heartfelt book for the intelligent, heartfelt reader. And thank you for that so much.
Thank you.
Can you give us a little glimpse before we let you go, what you each, and I hope together again, may be working on?
I'm working on a medieval thriller. So I am staying in history again, going back a few hundred years. And this will center around the European witch hunts.
Oh, that sounds great. Okay, love it. Marcus?
I write mostly nonfiction, and I do a lot of collaborations. So I'm just finishing up a project right now with an actor who I can't name because of a disclosure agreement clause. I can't name him yet. But he does a lot of good in the world, and he does a lot of work with the USO, which is kind of the booster organization for the military. So it'll be
Okay, you gave us a teaser. We love a teaser. Now everyone has to follow Tosca Lee and Marcus Brotherton. You're going to already want to because of this book, but you can find them. They each have a website. Marcus, you are on Facebook and Instagram. Tosca Lee, you are on Facebook, Instagram, and I think also Twitter. Am I right?
Yes.
And we just loved having both of you on here. You feel like family to Kristen and I. We're so grateful to Tosca. She helped us start the podcast over a year ago. She was one of our first 3 authors, and we've loved her then. We still love her. We've been fans of Marcus's for a very long time. Thank you to both of you. Just loved it.
Thank you so much. And can I just say, you guys were you ladies were pros then, and you're pros now. And I just remember coming away, and I told Marcus before we came on today, I said, this is going to be so fun because they are so good. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. That means a lot.
It does. Well, take care, all. We loved having you.
Thank you so much.
Kristen, it was so special. But, I think out of all the questions, I loved what you said at the end. It hit me so strong that on Memorial Day, you were sitting there having the realization, having just read this novel, that how do I get to enjoy this beautiful day of freedom with food and family in a park? And I can come and go as I please and choose my own career and marry who I want and live where I want and celebrate in public, all because of people who've dedicated their lives for this country. That was a strong statement.
Yeah. And think about how we show gratitude to those people who gave that sacrifice. I think we do it by appreciating that freedom, living in that freedom, enjoying that freedom. And that's something that I hope we never lose sight of, especially as these men and women who served during World War II are dying. There's not many left. I know one who survives personally. And I think remembering is key. And books like these are key, or books like this. This is very, very important to our national consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And, all throughout this story, we did see, how does someone survive a prisoner of war camp? How does someone survive a battlefield on the land in a foreign country? Different environment, different weather, different language, different people. You may be sleeping in the jungle. You may be sleeping in the desert. What carries them through? We spoke about so many things, but something struck me so strong. There must be some selflessness in that survival also. This is a tough thing, to put yourself as not the most important person in the survival. Like, they spoke a little about the prisoners taking care of each other. Or maybe the person thinks, I have to get home because so-and-so needs me. My wife, my child, my mother, my father. You don't often think, or my country, I'm doing this for my country. I don't know why I was surprised about the degree of selflessness.
Oh my gosh, I agree. I think if you aren't thinking about others and you're focused more on yourself, then there's really no reason to carry on. Put yourself out of the misery. In fact, there's a scene in the book, and I'm not going to say who it is, where one of the characters basically thinks to himself, why don't I just let go and slip into oblivion? But he couldn't, because he was thinking about carrying messages back, getting back to people he loved. So I think you're spot on with that others focus maybe helps us keep that will to keep surviving, even though the obstacles and the odds are so monumental.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's just a beautiful story. There was something very unusual that I couldn't fit in our line of questions. But at one point, the soldiers had come across a priest at a Catholic church, and the priest said to them, do you want to give a confession? They said, we don't have a confession. We don't know. And he said that, this quote I took out, every man has a confession. And I thought about that a long time. What did the writers mean by that? Could it be that sometimes in our life, we're pursuing such noble purposes that we forget that we are not perfect people? And maybe there is a strength in admitting imperfection, or admitting, I have some things I'm doing that I wish I hadn't, or I have done some things in the past that I wish I hadn't. We all have. We can say we didn't, but we all have. There is no perfect person. But I thought I thought it was very astute of the authors to bring up the notion of needing a confession during the crux of them forfeiting their lives, even
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, I love what you said because, you know, in this story, we had people who had certain principles that guided their lives, and then they were put into situations where they had to maybe compromise some of those principles or they were tempted to. And there were so many cool themes at play in this book, but that was one of them is how far will you, veer from your stated guide rails because of exigent circumstances? And that is a thing that we all wrestle with. And I thought that was a really cool theme that emerged here. And that scene you're talking about in particular brought that home. The other thing I wish that we could have talked with them a little more about was the relationship between the soldiers and the Filipino people, because there was a beautiful relationship there where they were dependent on each other for multiple things, from security, additional reinforcements, local know-how, but there was also that tenderness shown to some of our soldiers that was very important because they were so far from home, they were so young, and we see where people were baking for them, giving them wisdom, sheltering them. What do you think about that relationship?
Yeah, that's a great point. I wish we would have had more time to bring that up. Yes, it did show that showed something. And even when they were on the run, the soldiers, and they were fleeing, and they knew that their camp and their bases had been destroyed, they still would stop into common places where they had had Filipino friends that they had visited before or purchased something from before, looking for them, and they were looking for each other. And when they saw each other, there was a glimpse of camaraderie, maybe even a brotherhood there, a sense of relief to see each other still alive. That is a very special thing. There is and has to be some good that comes even out of war. And if there is some, that's one of them.
Oh my gosh, I agree. And I think we still enjoy a very strong relationship with the Philippines. It was a U.S., I don't want to say territory, but it was part of the U.S. up until the mid 1940s. But I think we still have a very strong bond at this point. And I think this was one of the reasons.
Mhm. It's just such a beautiful book. Everyone, you're going to have to pick it up. Do not forget to get it. It's a life changer. It's a book that matters. It's a book that inspires. And we're going to leave you with a few storm predictions because we've got some great things coming your way this summer. Madeline Martin, the keeper of hidden books. Katie Quinn and Janie Chang, the Phoenix Crown. Matthew Quirk, Inside Threat. Marie Benedict, Victoria Christopher Murray, the First Ladies, our friend Viola Shipman, Famous in a Small Town, Ashley Audrin, The Whispers, Fiona Davis, Spectacular, Sandra Brown, Out of Nowhere, in our first ever children's book, because we love it so much, Tiffany Hammond, A Day Without Words.
Oh, that's such a beautiful book. Well, listeners, as you know, we are growing every week. We are thankful that you are sharing our links. We love having these discussions. And look at how important this one was. We didn't know much about the Bataan Death March until, personally at least, I read this book, and Chris and I have been discussing it ever since. So just continue to stay on the radar with us. You can, of course, find us at bookstormpodcast.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You can find us on YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and podcast, and we should come right up. So until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.